from the 1970s on was a very, very unfortunate situation where the post-war settlement was unilaterally rejected by one side, but by our side, rather foolishly, the deal was maintained. And strikes were still kept within the confines of collective agreements, and protest generally was seen as ways of putting polite moral pressure on governments as opposed to using methods of more serious disruptive action. And we paid an enormous price for that. We paid a very, very serious price for that. Over in poor countries, structural adjustment programs and other things wreaked devastation. They claimed lives on an enormous scale. But here in the privileged countries, too, there was a great process of reversal. Rates of unionisation went down. People were very seriously attacked. Unemployment insurance and welfare programs were decimated. Today, people would need, in the wake of the Mike Harris cut and the lengthy period of increasing welfare rates well below the rate of inflation, we have a situation today that was described in the film where people would need a 55% increase to go back to the sub-poverty levels that existed in 1994. And so, as well, we've seen really serious attacks on the labour movement. We've seen unions in the private sector reduced in terms of their power and ability to struggle very, very seriously. And now, of course, that attack is proceeding apace in the public sector as well. Now, in 2008, another great transformation, a pivotal transformation, takes place in the form of the Great Collapse, the Great Crisis. I remember very well there were commentators, even commentators on the left, in 2008 who were delighted with the situation and were saying this is the end of neoliberalism. This is totally discredited. Neoliberalism is in ruins. And they had some, to be nice to them, there was some grounds for making those mistakes. I remember Greenspan, formerly the Federal Reserve, wringing his hands in disbelief at what was happening, acknowledging that he'd been completely wrong, saying he couldn't understand this. And he said at some debate he gave, some lecture he gave in some university somewhere, he said that this situation will reactivate the debate between socialism and capitalism, which was a rather astounding thing for someone of his standing to be saying, I must acknowledge. But the fact is, however, that since 2008, it was wrong to believe that the leopard was going to change its spots. It was wrong to believe that neoliberalism as a strategy was going to be junked. In fact, the exact reverse has happened. It has been massively intensified. A couple of years back, when the G20 was meeting in the city of Toronto, with the Harper government decidedly on the right wing of the gathering, they were developing an agenda of austerity. They were talking about the need for massive austerity. And we're starting to see that now play out. In Canada, it's in a relatively early stage. We could look to Greece to see the full enormity of what's being imposed, where people's pensions are being gutted, where where public sector unions are under massive attack, where unemployment is being allowed to reach astounding levels, where there is enormous resistance, of course, but at the same time we see the full enormity of the future as it's being written by this austerity agenda. And in Canada, we don't, I think, have a very long period of time before we see as well the same process underway. I note that the Harper government, taking a lead from Rob Ford in Toronto, has hired corporate consultants to hand them a blueprint on how the social infrastructure can be devastated. And as that initiative starts to play down through the provincial levels of government and the municipalities, we'll start to see very, very major attacks take place. I'm based in the city of Toronto, And so I get to see firsthand a major experiment with austerity that is taking place in the form of Rob Ford. Ford is actually a nitwit, and he's being presented as some kind of major tactician. The truth is that if they can catch him without his handlers around him, he does nothing but make a fool of himself. But he's fronting an operation that is enormously dangerous and comes directly from Bay Street. This week, or this last week in Toronto, we saw some of what is being prepared. We see him talking openly about privatising 10% of Toronto Hydro, opening it up for private business. This last week, his council voted to privatise the garbage pickup system within the city of Toronto, and that's not just simply a blow aimed at the city workers who've been picking up the garbage of people. It's actually a signal and a message and a direction being set by the city of Toronto that garbage pickup from now on in Toronto will be organised on the basis of sweatshop cheap labour. That's basically what's being prepared, and as well, it is now common knowledge that next month the intention is to lock out the city workers, and not only to lock them out, but a strike-breaking company has been recruited, so that they will actually try to lock them out and then force upon them a massively concessionary contract through a strike-breaking operation, and lay the groundwork for further privatisation. And if that's not enough, during the same week, the Public Housing Authority in Toronto, the Toronto Community Housing, votes with ratification from council, no doubt coming soon, to sell off over 700 units of public housing in the city of Toronto, in a situation where there are 70,000 people on the waiting list for public housing. And so that constitutes a glimpse, a first opening shot in terms of the attack that's being prepared. Then we have to look at the question of the capacity for resistance that exists. There's a great capacity for resistance. We see glimpses of it everywhere. We see it even in the encampment in this city that's taking place, the Occupy Sudbury. We see people ready to fight back. We see that there's a great anger. But this question of playing by the rules of a dead deal continues to haunt us. In the anti-poverty movement, we've been saddled over the last number of years by a strategy that has become known as constructive engagement. And the theory behind it is that forms of protest and resistance by the poor are counterproductive because the newspapers won't say nice things about poor people who fight back. And so what is needed instead is a polite discourse with governments in order to convince them that they should deal with poverty. And it's won certain things. In Ontario, for example, it won the passage of a piece of legislation called the Poverty Reduction Act. It's apparently the law in this province that poverty must be reduced by governments. The only problem with it is that while that law has been in effect, poverty has increased in the province of Ontario. So the strategy of trying to engage with governments on the sort of theoretical basis that they are brokers of the common good is a profound mistake. It's always been a mistake, but since 2008 it's been a disastrously ill-conceived notion. And in terms of the attack on the trade unions, it's very sad to live in Toronto right now and see what's going on. It's very sad to see workers seeing decades of struggle and gains facing the prospect of being wiped out, and to see people not ready to fight back, to see leaderships that have a perspective that is so wrong, so completely wrong. The response to the Ford attack on the public sector workers, on the city workers, has been responded to with essentially a public relations campaign. The notion is that what needs to happen is that not to do anything disruptive, not to do anything that the public, as they define the public, would not approve of, but instead to have a lobbying strategy, to get people to phone the local city councillors in the hope that they can vote favourably, and then to sit in the gallery and sit in the public gallery at City Hall and watch them vote to destroy workers' jobs and smash social programmes. And as I've said in other presentations in the last couple of days, very sadly and very ironically, in the gallery last week, when they were voting to privatise the garbage pickup system, the mobilisation there was actually smaller than the mobilisation of people that came out on the issue of a ban on shark's fin soup in the city of Toronto. And when a group of protesters from the Occupy Toronto site came down to show their solidarity, they were immediately confronted by a group of union marshals who implored them not to do anything disrespectful in the gallery. And they indeed sat and watched this historic and dreadful vote take place.